Good evening, everyone. I'm Hunter Ohanian. I'm the director of the Stonewall National Museum and Archives here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and I want to welcome you to week maybe 25 out of the pandemic. We started doing these virtual programming, so that we could actually bring ideas and thoughts to different people throughout the United States. Just for those of you who don't know about Stonewall, we've been around for 47 years. In our library, we have 28,000 volumes. And in our archives, we have 2,700 linear feet, which translates to about 6 million pages of LGBTQ material going back primarily to the mid-20th century, but up until the present day. We do have some late 19th century objects in our collection, but I would say 90% of it is from the last quarter of the 20th century to the present day. We do exhibitions there and talks and readings. And of course, now that we're in this COVID situation, and thankfully, knock on wood, we are getting out of the COVID situation soon. We've been doing a lot of virtual events. And if you have any suggestions for us, please go to our website at stonewall-museum.org, and you can find all of our emails there, and you can make suggestions. Each week we do something. Right now we are booked pretty much through the end of December, and we started this in July. We've actually had hundreds and hundreds of people attend these different events over the COVID period. And it is a good thing that it seems that maybe, again, I don't want to jinx things, but maybe life is beginning to return a bit to normal. But let's just see how things go. Schools, I think, are really at the forefront right now. And of course, last week we had the Democratic primary, and this week we had the Republican primary. But again, to underscore, to find out everything and to get into our to get the newsletter from us, just log on to stonewall-museum.org, go to the website, and you can sign up for our newsletter, and you can get more information. So these events are held once a week. If you don't have the opportunity, or if your friends don't have the opportunity to join us tonight, they get taped, and so they are put up on our website each week. And so they are there. They will become a part of our archives as well too. So Denise, hello. Nice to see you. Hello,
Hunter. It's good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's just great to have you here, even though you and I are right down from the street, from each other here in Fort Lauderdale. We are distanced by about 6 miles, and so that's there. And I also want to do a shout out to Emery Grant. Emery, reveal yourself, if you will. And hello, Emery. Emery is the director. And so Emery's right now deep in the throes of working on our SNP program. And you'll be seeing a lot more about that in the very near future. But Emery is the one who's behind the scenes, making sure that all this is happening and working for us. And also, oh yes, here he is. He's going ahead and showing things that's going on. So these programs last, if this is your first time, these last just an hour. And if you have questions or comments, throw them into the Q&A or into the chat box. And we will get to those. I kind of like to save the last 15 minutes for those, but sometimes I break them up. But as things come up, just throw them in there so you don't forget that you have that particular question. One last thing again before we move on to today's talk. We have 2 exhibitions up right now. If you are in Fort Lauderdale, we have an exhibition called BLK, which is from our archives. It's a magazine that ran from 1988 to 1992, which was designed exclusively for the African American and Black LGBTQ community, and absolutely beautiful exhibition. I'm very proud of it and very happy about it. If you want to come to Stonewall, we are open Monday through Friday from 11 to 5, or you can actually see the whole exhibition online at our website. We also have a second exhibition up. We have 2 exhibition spaces in Fort Lauderdale. The second one is called First Look, which I've been director of Stonewall only for the last almost a year. But what First Look is really my first view of the archives. And so you get to see a lot of stuff that I dragged out of the archives. And so it's an opportunity for you to see those objects as well. I understand that the virtual version of that was put up today on the website, so you can see that, but it's also available for you to come and see in person if you are here in South Florida. Where in the space in the gallery in which BLK is, it will be there until the end of the week, and then we'll be dark for a week, and then next week we're going to open an exhibition called Elected Sisters. And that exhibition is really looking at bi, lesbian, and trans women who have been leaders in the elected and political field, going all the way back to Ann Arbor in 1972 and Elaine Noble in Boston, I'm sorry, in 1974, Elaine Noble in Boston in 1974 as well too. And so we do a deep dive into all of those pioneers, particularly women pioneers who really paved the way for LGBTQ individuals to become elected officers throughout the United States. That exhibition will be online as well, so if you're from other parts of the country, you can see that. And also we'll be turning that into a curriculum so that if you want this for your center, your school, or any place else, we'll be happy to share that with you as well. So Denise, I have all of my business out of the way. Let's talk about you, since you are our star today. So Denise, tell us a little bit about your background.
Absolutely. Well, first, I'm looking forward to that exhibition, and you all never disappoint on your exhibitions, so thank you. And before, if I might, I just want to do a quick shout out to our centers all across the county, the country, but also the centers that are in the path of Hurricane Laura, and just, you know, let them know that our hearts are with them, and that we are keeping them in our thoughts, because it's looking like that storm is ramping up. So, so wanted to do that. So thank you again for having me. So I am the CEO of CenterLink, and I've been with the organization for about 9 years. And this is my 4th career after vowing I would never go into nonprofit when I first started, and doing a very circuitous route, but ending up here and could not be happier. It's really one of the favorite jobs I've ever had. I started out just working on membership, and have grown and learned about centers, and just am so in awe of them every day. Just the amount of work that they do, the support they provide for community, the creativity, the strength. It's just they're really amazing things, and to get to work with centers every day is just a real joy. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, that's great. And so the organization's been around, I'm just looking a bit at my notes down here, but it's been around since 1994.
Yep.
So 25 years. And it is, as I understand it, it's a network of LGBTQ centers around the United States.
And internationally. So we do have a good network of member centers up in Canada. We have some member centers in China and Mexico and Australia. We have a member center in Paris. We have one in Uganda. So smattering internationally. I'm working with IGLTA and the Milk Foundation to kind of identify some more that we don't even know about, but we are primarily across the United States, and it's a network of independent centers. For lack of a better parallel, we're kind of like a chamber of commerce for centers. So so it is a network of centers, and it extends all across the U.S. And around the world.
So tell all of us, I guess I have 2 questions for this. Why is it important to have an LGBTQ center? And then also describe for us what a typical, if there's anything typical in the gay world, but describe for us what a typical center looks like.
So I'll start with the second question first, if I might. There is no typical center. I think people who are fortunate enough to visit the Los Angeles LGBT Center, the New York Center, the Center on Halsted in Chicago, leave those centers and think every center looks like that, and they really don't. Those centers are amazing, and they're beacons of our movement, but most centers are really quite I would say medium in size. Some are very small, some are just virtual, some are online centers, and they provide resources and have meetings in different places throughout a community. But there are centers of all sizes, there are centers of all models, and so there is no one model of a center. And why it's important, you know, centers really are the heart and soul of communities. We like to say that great LGBT communities begin with great LGBT community centers. They're the hub. They're the you know, they're safe, welcoming spaces that are there for celebration in good times. They're there for consolation in sad times and real crises. They're there to provide help and support, whether it's a coming out support group or it's providing a food pantry for people that can't afford to go get their own meals. So it's where community gathers, it's where community finds help, and it's where community finds a lot of great events as well. You know, and we're going to be talking about a lot of those too, but so that's where we really feel like the community centers are the center of the community.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great to hear you say that. And specifically, I've asked you to speak about today, and you're going to do a presentation about arts and culture and literature, libraries and gallery spaces in the various centers, because obviously for Stonewall, we are a library and a museum and an archive. And so I want to see what some of those organizations are doing. But before we dive into that, tell me a little bit more about the other types of programs, because as I look around at the different centers around the country, there can be an AA meeting, there can be a discussion group, there can be a book group, there can be a drawing group, there can be a making group, there can be a knitting group. Tell us about some of the range of programs in the LGBTQ centers around the United States.
And range is really the word, Hunter, because it is really everything. It can be the things that you mentioned, so a book group, it can be a gathering, it can be a place that hosts AA groups or support groups of any kind, really. It can also be a place that, when we start looking at the very large centers, that provides health clinics, that provides a pharmacy, that provides psychological counseling, that actually has, you know, counselors in the center, and people can go in there, they accept insurance. So and then there's everything in between. There are centers that do financial counseling. Some have free legal clinics. A lot of them house community computer centers that are funded by the David Bonnet Foundation. And our friends at Power On now are providing centers with computers that center goers can use. So there's just such an array of possibility, and there's also such an array of actual services that centers provide. And I would argue that if you put all centers together and look at everything that they offer, I don't think that there's anything that's not offered in one way, shape, or form by some center. They just are amazing. And the other part of centers is their flexibility, their ability to pivot. So when we look at what happened when COVID hit, you know, a lot of our centers were forced to just turn on a dime and take everything that people used to walk through the door for and put it online, because they didn't want their communities feeling isolated, feeling forgotten. They wanted to continue that support network that they inherently form. And our centers have not only done that, so they've continued counseling online, they've continued keeping their website up to date and providing information, but they've taken their support groups online, they've taken their galleries online, they've taken their prides online, they've taken their book clubs, and it's just, they've done such a marvelous job of continuing the important work that they do and putting it in a whole different realm that I think is going to change the face of community centers quite a bit. I don't think we're ever going to be solely an walk-in situation anymore. I think this has really extended the reach of community centers, and it's been fantastic for community.
Well, and of course, we all see this. Cultural organizations and social service organizations and community organizations certainly see this. I mean, I've said this many times, but if somebody said to me 6 months ago, we'd be doing a series with thousands of people watching us on YouTube or on Facebook in a virtual way, I would say that's not possible. People need to see somebody up close, but it's clearly what has happened here. One last question, and then we'll go over to what you presented. And again, these are sort of obvious answers, but it's talk to us why it's important for these centers to be gay. Talk to us a little bit about the community. Why is it important for LGBTQ members to be together in a place and share what's happening? Why does that matter?
I think for lots of groups, and especially marginalized groups, I think it's really important to have that safe space, that welcoming space where we can come together and learn and share and support each other and inform each other. It's you know, the earliest community centers we talk about were really bars. That's where people used to come together in community, where we found each other, where we celebrated, where we socialized, and then, you know, the need for greater care, for support services burgeoned with the founding of the first community centers. And I think, you know, when you kind of look at that model, you see that it sort of began from a social standpoint, and there's so much social that still exists at community centers, but we really have added so much care, and you know, if we don't care for each other, who will? And so I think that's one of the keys of community centers is the bonding, is the safe space. It's a place where you can feel free to be yourself, to be celebrated, and to find support if you need it. And that's why community centers are just so essential. And I've often heard the question, well, what happens when community centers are no longer needed? And I don't know that will ever happen. You know, it would be great if we had so many protections that, you know, that we didn't need support and services, but I don't know that they will ever come.
It's not going to happen in our lifetimes, and
Yeah.
so, or even in our children's lifetimes. And
Yeah.
so, you know, it's interesting to hear you say that, because when you think about other, and I hate to use the word in this context, but when you think about other fraternal organizations, when you think about the Elks, or you think about the Odd Fellows, or you think about these other organizations, the VFW halls, they were ways for individuals to get together who had a shared experience.
Yep.
And so what's wonderful about the community center model, the LGBTQ community center model, is that it's taking what's happened before and putting like-minded individuals around together around individual ideas that they find important at the particular time.
Yep.
So a book club or an AA group or anything else is just of the moment that this group of individuals, you can engage them in that way.
Exactly. And, you know, none of us is one-dimensional. So our identity doesn't define everything that we are. And I think one of the great things about community centers is it gives you a place to be who you are, to identify however you identify, and also to do other things within that identity, whether it is a book group or a gallery opening. And important to note that, and you know, spoiler alert, a lot of this is in the presentation that's coming up, but that a lot of community centers are the only LGBTQ representation in certain areas. You know, when we do our annual survey or biannual survey, we find out that the community centers are serving not just their town and city, they're serving lots of area. And especially when we get out to the rural centers, they might be serving multiple cities, a region, multiple states. So this really, for a lot of communities, the center might be the only LGBTQ presence that they have or know.
Yeah, and that I think is a really important point too. And so Denise, just tell us all the website so that those of you who are online listening to us, you can hop onto the website to see all the member organizations and the different programs that those do. Remind us again of CenterLink's website.
Absolutely. It's www.lgbtcenters.org, or you could also go to www.centerlink.gay.
Great. .gay. Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Good. All right. So one of the things I asked you to put together when we talked about this talk was the idea of what's happening in the LGBTQ centers around the United States that relates to literature and visual arts. And you told me, of course, that is a piece of what the different centers do.
Mm-hmm.
And for us as a library and archive and museum, I really wanted to highlight that piece of the work that those organizations do. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, and I understand you might have something you want to share with our participants here. But let's
Absolutely.
take a look and see what it is.
All right, let's pull that up, and I will wait till you tell me you can see it.
Yep, I can see it.
All right, terrific. So we really, you know, Hunter, when we talked about the community centers as hubs of culture, I had to go to Wikipedia to really look at what culture meant. You know, what does LGBT culture really mean? And so luckily Wikipedia knows absolutely everything. But it was really about a culture shared by LGBTQ individuals. It can vary depending on what the geography is, but some of the common elements are the things that we talked about, the visual arts, the written arts. It can also, though, be an understanding of social movements, and it can be about those people that are really prominent in all of those things. So it can be about politicians, it can be about drag kings and queens, it can also be about pride parades or even the history of the rainbow flag. So, you know, LGBT culture encompasses a lot of things. And so in looking at that, I wanted to do a little cultural information about centers, and we've covered a little bit about that. And for anybody that wants a ton more information about community centers, we're actually in the middle of our 2020 survey, but every 2 years we put out a report with the Movement Advancement Project about community centers. What we found in 2018 was that community centers are serving over 40,000 individuals every single week. And as we mentioned, sometimes they're the only LGBTQ resource in their area. Not all centers look the same. We've touched on that. But important to note and understand that they are more than service providers. Services are incredibly important and a big part of what community centers provide. But they're also where a community comes together to learn and grow and celebrate. And when we look at, yeah.
Denise, can I interrupt you here?
Of course.
So when you say 40,000 people are served by all the centers, mm-hmm. and there are 52,000 or there are 250,000 centers, that's millions of people the centers are serving every week.
Yeah, when you aggregate it, it's about, so it's 40,000 individuals, you know, that's all centers put together. And this was actually only about 128, I believe, that participated. But we're talking about an aggregated over 2 million people every year that centers touch, which is arguably more than most organizations anywhere that are service providers.
Amazing, yes, it's not as much as the NRA, but I'll tell you, it's a lot.
That's for another call. So some important things about centers when we look at our culture, the Los Angeles Center, which is one of the oldest, actually the oldest LGBT center, in existence. It was originally called the Gay Community Services Center. They started in a Victorian house on Wilshire Boulevard. It was the very first nonprofit in America to have the word gay in its name. Really groundbreaking. And now the the Los Angeles LGBT Center is the largest organization in the world, multiple campuses, hundreds of millions of dollars in budget. It's really just an amazing, amazing organization. Then looking at the center in New York, so that center really was kind of a hub of activist events, and ACT UP actually had its first and many subsequent meetings at the New York Center. I'm going to show a little bit more about the New York Center there, but they have, in their remodeling, they have preserved a lot of that original room where ACT UP met, and have a lot of great activist artifacts there that are worth seeing. So that's a little bit about center culture and how center culture has really influenced a lot of the LGBTQ movement. But as far as communities of culture, they've played an enormous role in artistic culture as well. I grabbed this from Gay City's website because I just thought it was worded beautifully. But centers often collaborate with local artists to galvanize an audience for queer arts, to foster the development of LGBTQ artists and works, and facilitate accessible artistic excellence. And I just thought that was so true of what our centers do. So many of our centers have gallery space. They host readings, musical performances, plays, and lots of other things, poetry slams. So really important to acknowledge that the work the centers do around culture. And a lot of centers also have libraries, some have theaters, which we mentioned. So I thought I'd take us on a little tour, if that's okay, of some of our centers, and what our centers look like. And so what you're looking at now is a compilation of a few center libraries. One of the things as I go around the country touring centers that has struck me is how many centers have libraries, and that they are such a central role of the center to their communities. And I actually asked one of the centers, I'm like, well, I mean, you serve primarily youth. Are youth really checking out books and reading these books? And they said that once they get past the understanding that there's no electronics at all involved with the book, and get to start reading the book, that they do. The youth are really engaged and using the libraries. A lot of our other center members also at other centers are using libraries as well. The top left is the center in Las Vegas, and that library is located right next to their cafe in there. Gay City, that I just mentioned, is down at the bottom. On the bottom left. Bottom right is the center in Denver, Colorado, and top right is our center in Bradbury Sullivan in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So looks a little different in every center, but libraries are still a big part of what centers provide. A lot of art as well in centers, and on centers. So artistic representation doesn't have to be inside the walls.
Let me just interrupt for a second about the libraries before we move on to the next
Sure.
one. Is that at the Stonewall Library, we have over 28,000 books. It's believed to be the largest LGBTQ library in the world, or the solar system. Sometimes I hear different stories, but books come in all the time. And I just want people to know, a post just went up on the chat, that we have what's known as a library starter kit, because books come in, and if we already have a copy of the book, just as an aside, we received a donation of about 950 books recently, shipped to us from somewhere in New Jersey, and 95% of those books we already had in the library. So then we have to make a decision as to what to do with the books that we already have. And so we started this library starter kit because books come in all the time. We give them to some of the local nonprofits, but with the library starter kit, we want centers that, or any organization that doesn't have a gay library and wants to begin even like the smallest version of one, we want to be able to give them books to be able to seed that and start it going forward. So I just want to do a little bit of a plug for those of you who don't have any library yet. Just hop on our website. You'll find something about the library starter kits, and we will be more than happy to ship a box or two. All we ask is that you pay for the postage of it. But we want people to actually build the libraries in their individual organizations.
And Hunter, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I saw that program on the website. And, you know, one of the things I love about Stonewall is how the Museum and Archives is how supportive you all are of community centers, whether it's providing resources or books or traveling art projects. I mean, it really, it's such a great partnership. And I think for those centers that are young, just starting, and might not have their libraries up and running, or maybe just a shell of a library that they want to expand, what a great opportunity. So thank you for sharing that. It's a great program. So talking about center art, again, it can be on the outside, it can be on the inside. Some are galleries. The center at the very bottom, we were talking about centers outside of the US, and at the very bottom next to where it says Center Art, that's actually the center in Beijing, where they were doing a live in-person art event. But just, you know, to share a little bit of what that center art can look like. And murals on the outside is something that for some centers, that's a whole community project. For others, they will commission artists to do those things. I know in Fort Lauderdale, we have a new senior housing project going up, and we just have commissioned an artist to do a mural on the outside of that. So really excited about that. And it's just such a great addition to the community. Center events, you know, it can be anything from a movie night to a speaker series to a comedy workshop. And I put this in on purpose at the bottom corner there, it's the traveling exhibit of Stonewalls, the Stonewall exhibit that is in one of our centers. So just you know, so many opportunities to share culture with centers and with the folks who go to centers. Many of our centers also produce their local prides, which is such an important part of all of our community's cultures. So they actually are the ones putting the stages together. They are doing everything from beginning to end in producing pride events. As I mentioned, a lot of centers, almost every one of our centers had to go virtual. And so they have taken a lot of what they do and they've put it online. So everything from a virtual senior prom to panels to author talks to storytelling workshops. So and everything in between. Prides have also gone online. So again, just continuing that culture, taking you know, the situation of that presented itself of COVID and moving all of that culture online. I will say that I know many centers, including the New Haven Center, have taken their gallery space, and they're still rotating out their gallery exhibits and doing virtual walkthroughs to share with the community. So not skipping a beat. And so just wanted to go through some individual centers and kind of spotlight them. We mentioned the Los Angeles Center. I mean, multiple galleries. They have multiple theaters, including the Lily Tomlin Jane Wagner Cultural Arts Center. So that really is a grand scale. You don't normally see that much in a center, but if you get a chance to visit the LA Center, it is definitely worth seeing. Our center in Tulsa, the Dennis Arnell Equality Center, that is a program of Oklahomans for Equality. They have an Equality Center gallery, and every first Thursday they do a gallery center opening, which is a big cocktail party event to launch the new gallery exhibit. But they also have a theater there, the Lynn Riggs Theater, and they do films, they do shows. So some really cool events happening down in Tulsa. In New York City, probably the most famous art item that they have is in a bathroom. That is their Keith Haring bathroom, which is actually, like, I believe, I could be wrong about this, but I think it's like a registered historic landmark. I mean, the bathroom is not to be touched, and they took out all the fixtures, and it literally is just the Keith Haring murals that are in there. They also have a library. They do shows as part of the Bureau of General Services. So lots of events there. Moving over to New Haven, which is a center that I've mentioned a few times. New Haven is not a really large center, but with the space that they have a library there and they have a gallery, and it really is kind of central to so much of what they do. They do a drag story hour. So a lot of cultural events that anchor a lot of what the New Haven Pride Center does. Going back to the West Coast, the LGBTQ Center of Orange County, they had their core space, which really was all about services. They were able to expand to a second location in Santa Ana, and were able to get some beautiful gallery and event space that they have just done amazing things with, and have regular exhibits, musical performances. The DC Center has a whole arts program, and that includes an outright a literary event. They do art events, whether it's a sip and paint or whatever those might be. And then when we look at Savannah, the First City Pride Center, when you walk in, the first thing you walk into is a gallery. Again, grounded by that cultural element, and do a lot of other events there as well. But art is the first thing you see on the walls when you go there. San Francisco has done a whole remodel, and really the whole center just looks like a gallery. It's such a cool, sleek space. They do shows there. They do queer slams. They do Black music celebrations. I mean, really, the centers that have some space do just phenomenal things with that space. And even centers that don't are able to partner with local agencies, like a Stonewall Archive, to do great cultural events. So just a quick tour around the country of some centers and the artistic things that they do. As you mentioned, if you go to our website, you can look for your center. There are over 250 community centers across the country. So you're able to find your center on there, and you can always follow us. We do a lot of reposting of things that centers are doing on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
That's great. It's so great to see these from all over the U.S. And some of the centers may only have a single employee or even a part-time employee. On average, maybe they have 3 or 4 employees at most. I suspect that many of them rely upon volunteers to work and to make that happen. And also, I suspect that many of these organizations are underfunded. They're putting on a lot more programming than they really have any business putting on, just because they don't have the funding to do it. Talk a little bit about the things that centers face with regard to their organizational challenges.
Absolutely. Your suspicions are all very correct. I would say over half of our member centers have budgets that are less than $150,000. And so many of them operate completely with the volunteer base, and or a small staff that could be just one, and that is the person that opens the door in the morning, runs the programs, answers the phone, plunges the toilet, and closes the door at night. Some centers are really run on tight operations like that. I think when we talk about funding challenges, they're like every nonprofit, right? We all have to rely on donations and grants in order to get those things done that we need. And now more than ever, centers are relying on folks to do as much as they can, so that centers can do as much as they can. We don't know what the grant landscape is going to look like. There are grantors that have said, we're going to continue funding you exactly as we have because we think your work's important. But there's also grantors that have said, we're moving our money to COVID stuff, and you all don't qualify. So we've got to find new ways to get funding. And the thing that we have urged funders and donors to do is really understand the work and the broad scope of work that centers do. When COVID started and we did a survey with our centers, we found that without some help, without a changing financial landscape from what it was looking like, because centers were not going to be able to do live prides, we're not going to be able to do their live galas, it was possible that about 40% of centers were going to face closing within 6 months, and that within a year, 90% of centers were going to be looking at severe changes to their operations, if not having to look at closing as well. So it's tight for everybody, and we understand that, but if there's any way you can continue to support your centers, it is just, it's vital. Our centers, as I've said repeatedly, right, they provide important services, but in many cases they provide life-saving services. And they are there for that youth who gets thrown out of their house. They are there for the senior who feels isolated. They're there for that person who's just coming out and just emotionally is going through a difficult time. The center's there for the couple that wants to get married, for the graduate who wants to do surveys. I mean, they're there for them too. So in order for our centers to keep being there for community, we need the community to be there for our centers right now.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I want to ask you a question in a minute about the program that you have for helping people professionally to get into the field. But also I want to do a shout out to all of you who are here today that remembered that there are archives, gay archives throughout the United States. And it's very important for you to send your materials to those gay archives. We're here in South Florida. We have a national archive, but if you go onto our website, you will see that there are gay archives all throughout the United States. We would love to see extra copies of your brochures, of your literature, of things about you, because it's important for these archives to maintain this material, to maintain material, your newsletters, your event invitations, things that actually happened, show postcards. Send them to us, send them to any of the gay archives out there, because they need to be preserved. One of the things that we love the most at Stonewall is that we can look at things that were happening at the center in 1970. And the only reason that we can do it is that somebody preserved that material and sent it to us. And so as far as we have to think about the idea that we're helping people now, but we also collectively are trying to preserve gay culture going forward. And so we'll take any of that information that you have, send it to all of us. We'll be happy to take whatever. Because it's, we have, as I said before, we have 2,700 linear feet, 6 million pages. What are a few more cards? Just send it to us. Let us throw it away if we already have copies of it. Just put it in a box and seal it up and send it to us, because it is our culture. And these organizations are an important part of preserving their culture. But
and Hunter, if I can just cut in for a real quick second, we have had centers find out that they thought they were founded in a certain year, but when somebody dropped off their archives, they found out, no, they were founded earlier than that, or they thought they only had, a certain space, but then they found out, no, we had another space very briefly for another time. So it is vital. I mean, there is a lot of, there's that word of mouth archive, I guess, or history that gets told, but then there's the actual paper that shows the history that a lot of people might not know. So I totally echo that. And for anybody that comes to Fort Lauderdale, if you have a chance to go through the archives, it is just amazing. And I highly encourage it, because there's things there that you never thought you'd see. And so, yeah, I love what that is. A number of our centers, the New York Center has their own archives. So exactly echoing what you said, if you want to keep it local, check with your local center. They might have their archives with Stonewall already, or they might be partnered with a university or be keeping their own archives. So please donate.
Thank you for that. And also the other thing is, you touched on this a bit, but the idea about oral histories, there is a generation that participated in this major first wave of activism around the LGBTQ movement that really started obviously in 1969. Some can say it started earlier, but there is a generation which is truthfully dying out.
Yeah.
Take the time to do some oral histories at your centers and then share those histories. We'll keep them in our archives. Other organizations will keep them. You can find local humanities grants that will help fund that. It's not a ton of money, but it's really, really important.
Yeah.
Imagine if we had Oscar Wilde in front of his iPhone talking about what was going on. And so we have the ability to actually record this stuff now and bring it forward. And we have the ability to do it in an easy fashion.
Yep. Some of our centers actually, like the Loft up in Westchester, they do a storytelling workshop with their seniors. Some are doing intergenerational, where they get the youth members to interview the seniors. StoryCorps has done some of those things. There are organizations like Outwards that are doing this as well. So there's ways to get that oral history recorded and preserved forever, and echo you 100%. That is so important to make sure we're doing.
All right, so let's go to some questions, then I have some more questions. So we have a very good question here. I seem to think that the ED of a center should have a livable salary, but not an exorbitant salary. What is the data that you have on salaries at centers? Denise, do you want to try that one?
Yeah, it's really, it varies. And I think, more than a livable wage, I think there is a culture in nonprofits of a deficit culture, if you will, and a poverty culture of we can't afford it, we can't pay. But the truth of the matter is that we're talking about professionals running an organization that deserve to be paid for their talent and skills. I think, we talk about in our communities that everybody should be paid for their talent and skills. And so I think we have to be very cautious about deciding what is a livable wage and what is an exorbitant wage. I think we have to really stop the culture of poverty and deficit and start looking at our nonprofits and our centers as businesses, which they are, that need to be run by professionals with talent and expertise, and that deserve to be paid what they should be making. Because what happens is that these people with great talent and expertise, often we lose them to corporations or organizations that are willing to pay more. And it's a great loss, because we have a lot of very skilled people. So I think, we have to decide how we want to run our organizations and what we want them to look like in the end. We have executive directors that, work 60-hour weeks and make $17,000. And then we have executive directors that run, multi-million-dollar organizations and make a lot more money. So I think there are parameters that are set by not only auditors and GuideStar, but that are sort of basic nonprofit standards that only a certain amount can be spent on overhead before it's called into question. And I think that ratio is a good standard, but I think communities just need to be very careful about what they expect, what they want, and before we start worrying about exactly what the ED is paid, let's worry about what the organization is doing and how successful we want it to be.
Yeah, that's well said. But I have to say, I think the question is a fair question.
Sure.
It's not about us and about the centers, but just in general about nonprofit organizations. And for those of you who are not aware, Denise just mentioned it, but go to a website called guidestar.org, and every nonprofit in the United States, their tax return, nonprofits do file tax return every year. They're called a 990, and you should be able to see what the highest level individual is making in that organization. So for example, if you go to CenterLinks or you go to Stonewall's, you should be able to see what we actually make. There should be transparency, because these organizations are not owned by individuals. They're owned by all of us as
Mhm.
part of a public trust. And
Right.
so we have the opportunity to do that. The other thing, after the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, after the whole Enron thing, they changed the 990s to say that it was incumbent upon the board of directors of each organization to do an independent assessment as to what they were paying their CEO or their top individual in that organization. And so it's incumbent upon organizations, the board, to look at comparable salaries and not actually be paying more than what comparable salaries, both with the type of work, the type of organization, and the geographic location where they are. So both Denise and I report to a board of directors. Any other head of an organization reports to a board of directors, but it's on them to actually make a decision as to what the compensation should be. So if you feel, because I kind of sense that the question might be based on the fact that somebody's paying too much or is being paid too much, I have no idea if that's true. But there are ways in which you can objectively, in a non-accusatory way, look at that and to say whether or not that's true. And so it's something that all of us, whether it's the president of a hospital or the president of a educational institution or the president of a museum, I mean, you can find out how much the head of the Guggenheim makes. You can find out how much, because it's all public information. Guidestar.org, you can get a free membership and you can get in there, you can find all that stuff.
Yeah, and Hunter, something you said is really important, because a lot of community members serve on boards of directors, and I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is it's boards are usually a group of very well-meaning people that come to support an organization, but not everybody really understands what being on a board means, and part of it means making sure that you're complying with laws, that you're doing great financial oversight, and that you are supervising the executive director and setting that salary and doing reviews. So really understanding the roles of an executive of a board, and ensuring that the organization upon which you serve on the board is providing that transparency, is posting their 990, is reporting to GuideStar, and is doing all those things that give the community confidence in their operations. So a lot of good points that you made.
Yeah, no, thank you. And it's just, for example, at Stonewall, you can see we have a platinum seal of approval. You can read our 990 or annual report or strategic plan. All of that's available to the public. Those of you who care about these organizations, you should be striving for transparency, transparency, transparency. That is one of the most important things that you can do. Denise, I have a ton more questions here, but let me sort of take a little bit of, I know we only have 7 minutes left here, but so, I know, right? Time goes by. We have a lot of stuff to talk about. Yeah. So I recently came back from Palm Springs and West Hollywood. My husband and I were there for a little bit of a COVID vacation. And compared to here in South Florida, I was really moved by the number of mostly gay bars, but they tend to be more public. But how they had aligned themselves with Black Lives Matter. So what has been your experience in seeing LGBTQ centers in the United States aligning with the civil rights and the political ideals behind, let's put defunding the police aside because that tends to be a bit of a red herring, but what have you seen LGBTQ centers do with regard to Black Lives Matter?
I think there's no one answer to that, obviously, because as I mentioned, there's no one center that I can speak to, but look, the LGBTQ movement is born of social justice, and so many of our centers are born of the social justice movement, and it is very difficult because of the fact that there is so much intersectionality in our communities. It's very difficult for us to not be involved in any major social justice movement. You know, and just as a quick aside, our advocacy team, when they have put out emails about immigration, you know, we've gotten emails back from people saying this has nothing to do with LGBTQ rights. Well, yeah, it does. And so I say the same thing about Black Lives Matter. And you know, the famous quote by Dr. King that justice denied to anyone is justice denied to everyone. And that is so true. So what I've seen with community centers is generally, and you know, again, centers are at different places, so not all of them can come out and say, here's what we're doing, we're going to do this or we're going to do that. But we have seen centers not only issue statements of support, but we have a center in Raleigh that has gone out to and set up a booth or a table at all of the Black Lives Matters demonstrations, and they've provided first aid and they've provided water. We've seen centers that have gone out and spoken at Black Lives Matters rally. We've seen, I think, a tremendous amount of support, and even in defunding police and police presence at centers. We're seeing some centers that are not only supporting defunding police, some others are saying we will not have armed police at our centers because it is a trigger for so many of our community members. So I think with each community center, it's responding to their community in the best, most supportive way that they can. And so I think, you know, if I had to make a general statement, I think our centers are incredibly involved and supportive of the Black Lives Matter movement, and really trying to support their constituents in every way that they can. And again, for some, it's setting up a table. For others, it's issuing statements. For others, it's participating in rallies. For others, it's actually providing a place for, you know, in other times, I would say a place for people to meet, to gather, to come together. But in the best situations, there is community cohesion, and our LGBTQ community centers are there as great supports.
Yeah, and that's so well said. And the other thing is too, is that of course, we are all at a moment in which we actually have the opportunity to affect change. So whether you're the director, a brand new director of a small center, or whether you're somebody who might be a little seasoned like Denise and I, that maybe have a little gray in her hair, you know, listen, this is our time. You know, this is our time to make change. And so we are the ones who are in control and can make that happen. Let me jump to another question here. As we wind down, how can centers who are larger, both in physical size and in budget, best support smaller growing centers? And Denise, answer that question to give advice to a larger center, but then also answer that question to set expectations for what a smaller center might expect from a larger center.
Well, and I think there are various models. The reason CenterLink was founded, it was founded by the leaders of the 5 largest centers in the country at the time, and they had formed a support group, sort of a mini support group that was just the 5 of them, and they realized that, wow, if they needed support, the younger, smaller centers would probably need support too. So that was the foundation of our founding. And I think, you know, let me take the second part first. I think for smaller centers, it's important to reach out to those larger centers and let them know that you're there and that you're coming, and where you need that guidance and help. And I don't know of an executive director or CEO of a center that is not willing to help. And you know, everybody's need is money, and not every center can provide funding. But I think when we talk about sometimes space, sometimes ideas, sometimes, can you take a look at my budget, my initial budget? Does this even make sense? So I think I think kind of a larger center, smaller center mentorship, if you will, is something that we see a lot of. There are centers that, I think of the Bradbury Sullivan Center in Philadelphia, or in Allentown, that has joined all of the centers in Pennsylvania and formed like a consortium that they support each other. And if there's a new center that's coming up, they're welcome to be there. They're welcome to take part in that and be a contributing member, but also receive a lot of support. The Los Angeles Center has been, a key mentor to the center in Beijing. So it doesn't even have to be local. It can be international, it can be national, it can be regional. So I think for the smaller centers, let folks know you're there. That nobody's going to know you're there just because you are. You have to do some reaching out too. And for the larger centers, and I see this already, just be willing to share information, share advice, let people know what you've done, what's worked and what hasn't worked. But I think, and I think what the Pennsylvania Consortium has shown is that by building this large collaborative of centers in a state, it then allows funding opportunities where, one center will hold the main grant, but all centers across the state will get some of that to participate. So it's about connecting. It's just like anything else in network world. It's about connecting. It's about building relationships. And it's not always about money. Make sure that you're seeing the value in everything else that can be provided, because there is so much that established centers can provide for up and coming centers.
That's great, and it's very incredibly well said. So I'm going to have to wrap up here. Just a last couple of notes. First of all, Emery, reveal yourself. Say hello to everybody. This is Emery Grant, who is, hello, there you are.
Thank you, Emery.
Thank you, Emery. Emery is our deputy director at Stonewall, and he's been behind the scenes and makes all this stuff happen. This is all being recorded, and so you'll find it on our website very soon. Give Emery like about 10 days, and you'll be able to find that there. The other thing I want to say is that CenterLink has a great program about emerging professionals. And so I do want you guys to think about the idea that is something that you want to participate in, because building a next group of leaders is very important in this field. A lot of us got here accidentally. We were trained in other areas and we ended up doing this work accidentally, and now it's a very passionate workforce. But if you see opportunities to learn about best practices in this field, please look to CenterLink or look to other organizations to help you answer some of these questions. And the last thing I would say is that I'm a very firm believer in mentorship. And so I don't know that CenterLink has a mentorship program per se for executives in its program. Do you guys have a mentorship program?
It's kind of a de facto one, so it's not I wouldn't call it a formal program, but we have paired and often do, whether it's a program director with a program director, an ED with an ED, development director with a development director. We find those opportunities based on budget size, experience, things like that, to find those mentor opportunities when somebody wants them. They are really important.
Yeah, they're so important. And so my only call out to all of you who are watching this is that if you do have some gray hair, consider mentoring somebody else, even if you don't have an official program to do it through, but you can provide sort of subjective and objective opinions about what's going on. Don't bore them to death, just tell them what they need to know. And then also, if you're younger, seek out some support from people who've been in the field. Try to develop those relationships that you can have a regular cup of coffee or even have a Facebook chat or something like that, where they might be willing to take a look at your budget before you present it to a board, or they might be willing to take a look at your programming or deal with board problems or deal with those things. It's important for all of us not to be in a little bubble in this stuff. It's important for us to get it. Denise, this hour has gone by so fast. We've gone 4 minutes over, so I try not to do that. And we're getting some nice kudos here. And so that's great. I appreciate all of that. Thank you for all of you sharing your time. Denise, thank you for your time here. It's wonderful.
Thank you. I've had a blast. I really appreciate it. And thank you to you, Anne-Marie, for your interest in centers and your support of centers. And that's, you know, keeping that support in our community is so important. So thank you for that. And big Stonewall fans. So anytime we can be here for you, we know, we are.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. And guys, just remember, develop these kind of professional relationships that really you can develop these things. It's not hard to do this. And so until next week, we will see you. Next week, Steve Locke, who is an artist from Boston and now working at Pratt, who is going to talk about public monuments and which one should be torn down and which one should be allowed to stay. He had a beautiful exhibition plan for Faneuil Hall in Boston, commemorating Peter Faneuil's work as somebody who purchased slaves and brought them into the New World. And unfortunately, that was decided not to be funded. So we'll be talking about that. And we'll be talking about the difference between public monuments and public art, and particularly in a queer sense, and how those things come up in each of our communities. So again, go to stonewall-museum.org, sign up for everything. I promise we won't ask you too many times to donate to us, maybe a few. If you're here in Fort Lauderdale or South Florida, come visit us, and stay safe, everybody. Hopefully we're on the other side of this thing. Thank you.